All right, French learners. Ready to tackle one of the trickiest parts of the language.
That's right.
Today, we're going deep on French punctuation. Specifically, those things that can make or break your fluency.
Things like.
Those accents. Plus, the cedille.
Yes.
And of course, those fancy French quotation marks you need to ace. That Pronunciator Basic French Punctuation Certificate.
Absolutely. It's about more than just rules.
Oh.
French punctuation is almost like music. It gives the language its rhythm, its style.
So it's not enough to just know where to put a comma?
Exactly. You need to feel the flow, the expression. Mastering French punctuation is like learning a new dance step.
I like that. So are we saying that getting those accents and quotation marks right can actually make you sound more French?
You got it. It's about capturing that certain je ne sais quoi.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
And a great place to start is with those tiny but powerful marks, the accents. They can completely change the meaning of a word.
Oh, I've learned that the hard way. Once I tried to order a coupe de crème in Paris, forgetting the accent on crème.
Oh no, what happened?
Let's just say the waiter looked very confused. It wasn't the delicious treat I was expecting.
Right. Accents are essential. We have 4 main types. The acute A, the grave A, the circumflex, and the diaeresis.
Wow, 4. Okay, I'm ready for a crash course.
Let's start with the acute accent, like in café.
Ah, café.
Exactly. It signals a closed E sound, a crisp and bright E. Then we have the grave accent, like in tray.
Yeah.
That indicates an open E sound, more relaxed and drawn out.
So even though it's the same letter, the accent changes how we pronounce it and the entire flow of the word.
Precisely. Then there's a circumflex, which can change the vowel sound and often indicates a missing letter from way back.
Like a historical clue hidden in plain sight.
You could say that. Think of the word forêt.
Forest?
Yes, it used to be spelled forest with an S.
No way.
Way. The circumflex reminds us of that lost S and gives the O a slightly different sound.
Fascinating.
Now, at the diaeresis, those 2 little dots, like in naive,
Na-
it shows us that 2 vowels next to each other should be pronounced separately.
Okay, so it stops them from blending together. Makes sense, like cooperation in English sometimes.
Precisely.
Okay, I'm feeling more confident about those accents already.
Great. And while we're on the topic of letters, that can be tricky.
You mean the one that looks like a tiny torture device?
You mean the Cedilla? Haha, yes. That little hook under the C.
It always looks a bit intimidating.
I know, but it's actually quite simple. It only appears before A, O, and U, and it softens the C sound, making it like an S.
So instead of a hard C like in cat, it becomes a soft S like in scent.
Exactly. Take the word garçon.
Ah, garçon.
Without the Cedilla, it would sound like garçon, not very French.
Not at all. The cedilla makes it so much more elegant.
Right. Even a tiny mark can change how a word sounds, how it feels. And speaking of stylish punctuation...
Oh, are we talking about those super chic French quotation marks, the guillemets?
We are, those double chevrons. They look way more sophisticated than plain English quotes, don't they?
They do. They're like a fashion accessory for your writing. But are they just about looks?
While they definitely add flair, they have a specific function indicating direct speech.
So there are different rules than English quotation marks.
Absolutely. And knowing how to use them is crucial for that pronunciator certificate.
Okay, I'm all ears. Give me an example.
Imagine someone asking, do you speak French? In French, using guillemets, it would be, parlez-vous français?
Interesting. The question mark is inside the closing marks.
Yes, and there are spaces before and after the guillemets, subtle but important.
I see. It's those details that make French writing look so distinct, like you're really mastering the language.
Exactly. And while we've covered some fancy punctuation marks...
We can't forget the trusty comma.
Oh, the comma. The source of endless debates. And yes, French has its own quirks when it comes to commas.
Lay it on me. I'm ready for the comma conundrum.
Well, for instance, in English, you often use a comma before and in a list, like apples, oranges, and bananas. In French, you usually drop that comma before a, meaning add. Small difference, big impact.
French is efficient with its commas.
You could say that, but what happens when you have a really long list?
Yeah, that's when things get confusing, even in English.
Exactly. French uses semicolons to break up complex lists, especially those with their own internal commas, clarity and elegance.
Always finding that balance. I'm sensing a theme here.
Absolutely. And speaking of elegance and flow, remember that idea of French punctuation being like music?
Yes, it's all about the rhythm,
Well, there's another concept that really brings this to life.
Oh.
The e caduc, the silent E.
A silent E. Oh, those tricky little things. They're always messing with my pronunciation.
Tricky indeed. They're there, but not there. A silent E can still influence pronunciation and the rhythm of a sentence.
So how do we know when an E is silent? Is it just random?
Not entirely. There are patterns to look for, but it takes practice. And guess what? Sometimes those accent marks we talked about earlier can hint at a silent E.
Really?
Yeah.
Like in demander, the acute accent on that first E tells us that the final E is silent.
It's like the accent is saying, hey, I'm silent, but I'm still here, influencing the flow.
Exactly. It's all connected.
Wow, okay. The silent E, it's like a secret handshake for French speakers.
That's a great way to put it.
Speaking of secret handshakes, what about capitalization and the spacing around punctuation in French? Those seem different too.
You're sharp. You're right. Unlike English, French doesn't capitalize days of the week or months of the year.
Interesting.
And with spacing, there are specific rules. For example, you always put a space before a colon, semicolon, question mark, or exclamation point in French.
So English punctuation likes to snuggle up close, while French punctuation likes its personal space.
Exactly. These little details matter. They impact how professional your writing looks. Imagine a formal letter with no spacing around the punctuation. It would just look wrong.
Oh, totally. It'd be like wearing sweatpants to a fancy dinner party. Exactly. It's not the right vibe. Mastering those nuances of French punctuation is like adding the finishing touch.
That je ne sais quoi.
Precisely. It elevates your French from simply correct to truly sophisticated.
So learning French punctuation isn't just about avoiding those red marks on your homework. It's about expressing yourself with style.
It's like learning the secret code to unlock the true beauty of the language.
I like that. So we've covered accents, that snicky Cedilla, those chic guillemets, and even the unique way French handles commas. Phew, that's a lot of information. Maybe we should take a little break and let it all sink in.
A good idea. Let's take a moment to process all this. Then we'll come back and tackle some more punctuation puzzles. Okay, so we've talked about accents, the Cedilla, guillemets. Now let's get back to the comma.
Oh yeah, the comma. Always a bit tricky.
It is, isn't it? And of course, French has its own way of using commas.
Of course it does.
Take lists, for instance. In English, you often use a comma before and in a list.
Apples, oranges, and bananas. Like that.
Exactly. But in French, that comma before a, meaning and, is usually dropped.
Huh. So no comma before the and in French?
Yeah.
That's interesting. But doesn't that ever cause confusion?
Good question. Especially with longer, more complex lists.
Yeah.
That's where the semicolon comes in.
Ah, the semicolon. French loves its semicolons.
It does. It helps break up those complex lists, especially if they already have commas within them.
So semicolons bring clarity.
Clarity and elegance.
Always with the elegance.
Always. And this brings us to another concept that really highlights the musicality of French punctuation.
Oh, more music. I'm listening.
It's the icaduc, the silent E.
Oh, those silent ES. Those can be tricky.
They can. It's an E that's written but not pronounced. But even though it's silent, it can still influence pronunciation. And it can affect the rhythm of a sentence.
So how do we know when an E is silent? Are there rules, or do we just have to guess?
Well, there are some patterns, but it does take practice to get the hang of it. And you know what's interesting? Sometimes those accent marks we talked about earlier can give us a clue about silent ES.
Really?
For example, take the word demander.
Demander. To ask.
Exactly. That acute accent on the first E is a signal that the final E is silent.
So it's like the accent is whispering, hey, don't pronounce me, but pay attention to that silent E over there.
That's a great way to think about it. It shows how connected everything is in French punctuation.
Wow. The silent E. It's like a secret code.
You could say that.
Speaking of secret codes, what about capitalization and spacing around punctuation? Those seem different in French, too.
You're picking up on all the right things. You're right. French has its own style there, too.
Help me in.
Well, unlike in English, days of the week and months of the year aren't capitalized in French.
No capital letters for days or months.
Interesting. And the spacing around punctuation is specific, too. For instance, you always put a space before a colon, semicolon, question mark, or exclamation point.
So in English, the punctuation kind of clings to the words. But in French, it needs its space.
Precisely.
Breathing room.
Yes. And these seemingly small details actually have a big impact. Imagine getting a formal letter where all the punctuation is crammed against the words. It wouldn't look very professional, would it?
Definitely not. It would be like showing up to a job interview in pajamas.
Exactly. It's about matching the style to the situation.
So mastering these nuances of French punctuation, it's like the final touch that makes your French truly shine.
You got it. It's like taking your French from good to magnifique.
From good to magnifique. I like that. It's not just about being correct. It's about adding that certain French flair.
That's the spirit.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. Accents, the cedilla, those stylish guillemets, comma quirks, even silent es. It's amazing how these little punctuation marks can have such a big impact on the French language.
They really do. And it's these nuances that often trip up learners, but they're also the key to unlocking a deeper understanding. Appreciation, even.
I agree. And I think that's what makes pronunciators so great for learning this stuff. It's not just about memorizing rules.
Right.
It's about understanding how those rules actually make French, that flow, that elegance.
Exactly. It's about seeing punctuation not as a hurdle, but as a pathway to fluency.
A pathway paved with commas and accents and those cool double chevron things.
Exactly.
So for our listeners out there, those who are working towards that Pronunciator Basic French Punctuation Certificate,
Yes.
what are some key things to remember as they dive into that library module?
Well, first and foremost, remember those accents. They're not just decoration. They're crucial for pronunciation and meaning. Mastering them is a must if you want to understand and be understood in French.
It's like learning the right notes to play a beautiful melody.
Precisely. And secondly, embrace the unique style of French punctuation. Those guillemets, the spacing rules, it's all part of the beauty, the precision of the language.
And don't forget that silent E. It might be invisible, but it plays a big role in the rhythm, the flow of French.
Absolutely. As you work through the pronunciator module and you test your knowledge, here's something to think about. How does understanding punctuation actually deepen your appreciation for French culture? The way ideas are expressed.
Ooh, that's a good one. It's not just about getting the right answers, is it? It's about going deeper.
Exactly. So to all our listeners out there, remember, you're not just learning punctuation, you're unlocking the secrets of the French language.
Well said. Go forth and conquer those punctuation puzzles. And maybe, just maybe,
Yes.
you'll be able to correct a Parisian waiter's grammar one day.
Ha ha ha. That would be a sign of true mastery. But seriously, I have no doubt our listeners will do amazing things with their French.
I agree. So to everyone out there, keep practicing, keep exploring, keep embracing the beauty of French.
Au revoir.
Au revoir.